This episode contains stories of trauma related to domestic abuse. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org. Welcome to It's Your Story to Tell. I am really honored to be here with Elissa on this podcast today. And her story is such an inspiration. When we were connected by a coach that I went through my training with, I was just amazed at her story, her transformation, and what she's doing to make a difference in the lives of women who have unfortunately experienced domestic abuse. So thank you so much for being here, for your willingness to be vulnerable, to share your story so that we can encourage other women in what's possible, because both of us share a history of getting out of abusive situations. And while it was very hard to walk through, it wasn't impossible. And I think when people hear your story, and I know they've heard mine, the hope is that they can be inspired to do hard things. So thank you.
Absolutely. Hard it was, but liberating is, and freeing, I think, is the best payoff.
Yeah.
The healing afterwards. 100%.
And you've been on this journey now for about 4 years. Do you mind just giving our audience a little background on what your story is?
Yeah. So I am originally I live in Michigan now, in West Michigan, but I'm originally from Central Ohio. And I had moved up here to Michigan in 2014. And at the time, you know how this happens, Megan, you get love bombed and you just believe everything. However, I'd already had a past with this person. So it was just like rekindling a flame. And at that time, I was at the height of my career. I had my own radio show at night on a country station called Country Nights Live with Elissa. And it was a request and dedication show. So often I would have listeners call in and dedicate songs to other people within the community. It was so much fun. And one particular night, the person who I experienced abuse from called into my radio show, and that's how we connected or reconnected. Long story short, I ended up moving up here through kind of sort of like an ultimatum, but ultimately it was my own decision, right? And right away, the first night that I was in Michigan, I started to experience things. And at that point, it was pride and it was ego. It was like, I just walked away from my career and I can't go back. And I ended up going through the cycle of abuse, you know, the honeymoon stage, the cycle of abuse, the apology stage, all of that for 6 years. And when you experience abuse, it's never just mental, emotional abuse or just physical abuse or just sexual abuse or financial. It so often encompasses all of that, right? And so eventually you just get, what am I looking for? You just start to believe everything that they're saying that you are.
Yeah.
So it was really hard. I think on average, the woman who tries to leave or the victim who tries to leave an abusive relationship tries to leave on average 9 times. I can't tell you how many times I left and went back and left and went back. I think the thing that made my situation just a little bit harder is that in Michigan, I don't have a support system here.
Yeah.
And by the time I was ready to leave, I had a 3-year-old with this person. So that's scary. You know?
Yeah. Sure.
But one of the things that my mom always told me And because she was in a mentally abusive marriage before she met my dad. And she always told me, she said, Liz, one day you're just going to wake up angry and you're just going to know that that's the day. That is the day that you have to go. You're over it. You can't do it anymore. And that is exactly what happened. It was during the summer in 2019, and I had taken my son outside to go play in the yard, and I sat in my Jeep all day. I could not get myself to go into the house. And finally, I think I waited for him to fall asleep, and I went in and I grabbed the laundry that was in the dryer. I threw it in a laundry basket and away I went.
Wow.
Yep.
One, a hard way to leave, right? Because you're leaving, but you're leaving without any of the comforts.
Right.
I think it's so interesting, that insight from your mom, because I didn't really recognize that, but that's the same that kind of happened for me, because I had gone back many, many times. And you're right, it wasn't just one form of abuse, because there's all of this that has to go on in order to control you, right? So they're controlling you on all these different aspects of your life. And I also was far away from family. I was on the West Coast. My family was all on the East Coast. I had friends, but because of not wanting them to see me in that light, I didn't really talk about it a lot. There were a few friends who had been close enough to see. There's a few occasions where he couldn't hold in things and he was upset, and so they got small glimpses but never the full experience. So there were questions, but it was just something that we didn't really talk about, because I was a professional woman, successful in my career, had this image, right, that I wanted to be known for, because there was a lot of shame. Like, how did I get into this situation? I'm smart, but I'm also a very caring, compassionate empath. So there's like all of these things about me as a person that made me a good target for somebody who wants to have this type of relationship. And I don't even know that they realize what they're doing, or it's like they're setting out. It's just they've had hard things, they're broken. This is how they get their needs met. And yeah, that cycle, we would go through these times where it was like really great. And so you're just like, okay, there's hope. Maybe there was like this breakthrough. And I feel like the cycle for me was every few months, where it would be hard. There would be that apologies and the love bombing again. And it would be like, oh, okay, breakthrough. And I would let my guard down and come back, or just keep moving forward and not really dealing with it. And then it would happen again. And that moment for me that I knew I could not be here anymore was when my son, who was in middle school, and my daughter came when there was an abusive situation happening, and my son stepped in and he turned on him. And it was at that moment that I couldn't live in denial anymore, because while they were experiencing it, our kids, whether they're watching it, they know. Like, there's a knowing within them that something's not right and it's affecting them. But in that instance, I was faced with the fact that now my son feels like he has to protect me, and this person turned on my child. And that was it, and then I had the strength at that point, because of probably the anger of just like, you're not going to do that to my child,
Mm-hmm.
that I was able to move forward. And then because DHS became involved, because we had a counselor that heard the story and has to report, when they came to talk to us, they brought a domestic abuse advocate. And that woman was life-saving for me because it was somebody who had lived it and was able to help me walk through and untangle my mind. Because like you said, you just believe.
Yes.
And you're so confused.
There's a lot of reprogramming that has to be done when you leave. But I think I want to touch on what you had said previously about, well, both of us, like about that cycle and about your guilt and shame that you felt. And I think there's so much guilt and shame that comes from this cycle, and the fact that the victim becomes an addict. We are addicted to the cycle of abuse. And so leaving is quitting something that you're addicted to cold turkey.
Wow.
And I don't think that like society as a whole does not recognize that, because there's so often the comment of, well, why doesn't she leave? Well, I can tell you so many statistics as to why we don't leave. And I think that's the work that you and I are both trying to do, is just education in general, because this is something that, what is it, 1 in 4 women experience, and 50% of cases are actually reported. So what are we actually saying here? How many women are actually experiencing domestic violence?
Right.
How many women with your podcast alone are learning how to reprogram themselves after abuse, right?
And recognizing that what they're experiencing is abuse. Because for me, I didn't want to admit it. Because if I admitted that there was abuse, one, I've subjected my children to this. So there's a lot of shame and disappointment in that. And then it's like, then am I not smart? Like, how did this happen? You know, there's all of these things that then you start feeling about your own worth. And I just want people to know, like, that is normal to feel, but it does, because you're in a domestic abuse situation, it does not mean you're not smart. It does not mean that you're not a good person. It does not mean that you don't love your children. It just means that you have brokenness and that you need healing and you have needs, right? And so these people have recognized an opportunity and taken advantage of the amazing good person that you are. So you have no shame. Like, the shame and the guilt and everything is on the abuser, but the victim tends to be the one who owns it. And I think you're right. Like, I went through recovery groups, like, for codependency, and I recognized, like, I used to be judgmental of people who were addicts. Like, oh, wow, I mean, you can't not say no to drugs. And I'm like, I was so broken in my first recovery meeting because I realized I was no different. We all are just trying to cope, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, food, or relationships. Like, I was addicted to this relationship. And you're right. That is such an important piece for people to recognize, that there is a very strong pull that you have to go through the withdrawal process.
Yeah, you have to detox.
And you can't do that alone.
No. Luckily for me, when I left, I did some couch surfing with my son. There were nights where we slept in my Jeep in either people's driveways or parking lots. And I told you that we went through a transition program after we left. I was lucky enough to have one of those in the city that I, was living in at the time. And sometimes I slept in their parking lot because their shelter was full. And eventually I met another single mom who, she had just broke off her relationship. It wasn't as toxic, right? But she was looking for, times are tough out here, right? Like, and it takes a village. So she invited my son and I to move in with her, and we just raised our kids together for a wonderful, beautiful year. And that also happened to be, pandemic when the world shut down. So we had each other, which was so comforting. But I think so, survivors in general, we are so immersed in our guilt and our shame that we honestly think that we are alone, because after leaving, so much comes up, right? You can go through your period where you feel great, right? And you feel like you're back to normal, but eventually you're going to find yourself in another relationship. Or like me, I found myself in another abusive relationship, but it was actually a job, right? Because I think there's another statistic. I think it's like 90% or something like that, where abused women tend to fall right back into the same patterns, especially if we haven't done our healing, right?
I did it, and it was another really, and that was, I think, too, another piece of why I stayed in this relationship for the time I did, is because I had already left another relationship, very different, but I had not done my work, and I went into another relationship that I thought looked totally different, but there were still these desires to control me in both kind of situations. And then in that second the last abusive relationship I had, I was like, I can't have another divorce. Like, what are people going to think about me? I'm a Christian. Like, I don't believe in divorce. And here I am. If I leave, what does that say about me?
Those societal expectations are so heavy. Yes. But I think that there is so much power in education and knowledge, which, like when you said it was Julia, right?
Yeah.
That you had met. When there is someone who comes along, whether you have somebody or you do it yourself, when you're able to start identifying, oh, that's gaslighting. Oh, that's love bombing. Oh, this is abuse, and this is the type of abuse, and this is the cycle, and whatever it is, once you're able to put a term or a definition to what is going on, you all of a sudden have 2 feet to stand on in a relationship. It is so powerful. Like, when I picture myself in that relationship, when I finally started to educate myself on what was going on, like, I see this badass woman walking out of the woods with like a pack of wolves, and there's just like fog, and she's got battle scars and dirt, and like just a fighter.
Yeah.
And that is what education did for me. And that is why, like, I'm so passionate on meeting other survivors, making community with other survivors, and just really making education accessible.
Right.
And the guilt and the shame, like that's always going to be there. But if we talk about it more, then that will give so many other survivors permission to talk about their journey.
It's perfectly said. I mean, that is my mission, is like to destigmatize trauma so that we can talk about it, because it's only through talking about it It's only through acknowledging it and then taking responsibility to change where you're at through learning that you can have healing and go on to live a life that is so much more fulfilling and authentic, And I think one of the things for me is in that education piece that was so significant is that I thought I was crazy. Because I was like, is this me? What is true here? And so with that education and being able to label things, I think, there's also power in being able to label something that says, okay, now I know what that is, so that when I see it again, I can accurately classify it in my mind and speak truth around it. No, what you're doing right now is shifting the blame. You're gaslighting me. You're making me feel crazy, but I don't have to take the bait. Like, I know what you're doing here. And that is so empowering. And that's that picture that when you were saying that, I just picture this empowered woman, but that does not happen without taking personal responsibility. And for me, I spent so many years because I had abuse that started at a young age. There was sexual abuse when I was young. And I became a victim, and it's really weird because I believed in big dreams and all of these things, but yet I still had this victim mindset when it came to relationships. So it's like you can be one thing in one area of your life and another in another area of your life. But when you don't have congruency in your entire life, you're not living authentically.
Do you think that chameleon aspect about certain people is part of codependency?
Yeah, I think it's I think codependency is a coping mechanism, right? And so I think that is a way that it manifests because I wanted the approval and validation. And so over here, I could be in my professional life, I was getting all of that validation, and it was allowing me not to look over here where there was all of this struggle and heartbreak because I felt so painful. And I was like, if I go into those dark spaces, I wasn't sure that I would be able to come out of it. I was fearful of, would I commit suicide? Would I be so depressed? Like, how am I going to get out of bed? I have kids to take care of. And so I was kind of splitting my life into these two different segments just as a way to survive. And then that, I think, led to being codependent and perfectionist and being an achiever. And it was all, again, just like any addiction, whether you go to food or you go to drugs or whatever, it's all about making yourself feel okay.
100%. 100%. One of the things that I've learned since being gone for 4 years now, I've been on this healing journey, and there have been peaks and there have been many valleys, right? Where I'm just up and down. And I learned in the beginning what I was doing, because we talk about that education piece. And I think that this needs to be highlighted as well, is that I was intellectualizing my feelings so I didn't have to feel them.
Yeah.
Yes. So I've just learned over the past year how to actually sit in a feeling and ride the wave all the way through.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good and so, so important. Yeah, I definitely did not know how to sit with feelings. And I learned that from a really young age at around 7. I talk about that in episode 1 with my story of how I was confronted with, wow, when I have big feelings or I share those, they can hurt people, and I don't want to hurt people. So I'm not going to acknowledge feelings for myself, because if you acknowledge them and you have them inside, but you can't let them out and share them with anyone, it's even more devastating. So I was just like, cap those off. We're not going to have feelings. And that is where I really damaged myself, because I then no longer listened to my own voice, because if I listened to that, I would have to do something about it. So it was easier to just silence it and just go forward. And that kind of just, I was like, oh, wherever life takes me. There was no like, this is what I want, this is how I'm going to get there, and building a plan and listening to myself. None of that was part of my life until I started this process 7 years ago, where I had to start sitting with my feelings and begin learning to like trust my intuition.
Yes. I think part of the whole, like you said, like in episode 1, where you were kind of like, if I have this reaction, it affects somebody else, right? I think especially empaths, which is a large majority of people who find themselves in abusive situations, we learn to make ourselves small from a very young age, which makes an abuser or narcissist like they see that. Mm-hmm. They see that you're willing to make yourself small. That's easier for them, right?
Right.
And so part of the healing process too is education, like we've said a million times already. And that whole woman coming out of the woods with her pack of wolves is learning how to take up space. That was so hard for me. I am a voice actor. And when I first started this voice acting journey, almost 2 years ago now, I was with my voice coach, and he had given me a script for a children's book, and he asked me to act out the part of a king. And when you think about acting out a part of a king, you have, a deep royal voice, and you stand like this and you take up space, right?
Yeah.
I practiced that in here in this studio and had to ask my coach for a break because I broke down crying because I realized for the first time in 4 years, well, longer than that, nearly a decade now at this point, I was taking up space in my own house. And even though I knew logically I'm safe, my brain didn't allow me to think that or to feel that, or that it was even a positive thing that was happening to me in that moment, right?
Wow, yeah.
And that moment was the moment that I realized, like, oh, wow, this is something that I really, really have to work on. And I have been, but it is a process of, educating yourself and healing yourself and building community and learning how to take up space. Like, we were once broken women. That's just the truth of it. Yeah. And now the best thing about being broken is that, yeah, we have all of these pieces laying around us, right? And they may be at our feet like a jigsaw puzzle, but we don't have to go from 0 to 100. Right. We can go from 0 to 1 and pick up one piece at a time. And we don't have to put the pieces back where they originally were. We get to choose now how we rebuild ourselves and where those puzzles fit best for the person that we are now, because the person that we were before that relationship, there's always going to be a before and after. The person that we were before doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
We are a phoenix. We are born again, right? We will rise.
That's such a beautiful image. And on my podcast with Brandy, she was talking about this, and it's interesting because when I was going through the process, I had a vision. It wasn't a jigsaw puzzle, but I was standing in front of a mirror and I just bashed it. And then there were all of these pieces, and I was like, okay, now how am I going to put this back together? And I don't want it to look anything like it did before. I want it to be so much better. And Brandy, also someone who, went through a difficult marriage and came out on the other side better and is making an amazing difference in women's lives. She was talking about the same kind of vision and experience. And for her, she had a vision of like a mosaic, or a stained glass window of where it's even more beautiful.
Mm-hmm. It is.
When you go and you put it back together. And I think the hardest part is getting to the point where you're willing to bash the old and like break it down. Because once I got to that point, I had acknowledged where I was. I knew it was not where I wanted to be. And now it was all about it was so empowering to say like, well, what do you want to create now? Like, who cares what anybody thinks at this point? Like, it's all about who am I, and going back and finding my identity. And that was such a beautiful process of getting to know me. What do I like? What do I value? What am I called to do? And so, yes, there's like all of these ups and downs, and there's hard days. Like, just because you have this awakening doesn't mean life gets like, oh, all of a sudden it's, Disney princess, your Prince Charming sweeps you off your feet and, oh, you live in the castle. Like, no, right? I mean, I think actually those movies in some ways were not good for me because I'm such a, like, I love feeler that I'm just like, that's what love looks like. No, that's not what love looks like. No. But I get to have my Prince Charming now, but it is hard fought, like, relationship
conversations.
Yes, where you're willing
each other where you're at,
having boundaries, like all of these pieces. And it is this continual process. And I think one of the things that when you shared that story with your voice coach that stood out to me is that our body will bring awareness to areas where healing is needed. And in that moment, what you began to experience was alerting you to an area of your life that you had the opportunity to grow in. And so that's where like growth mindset and seeing things positively, that was not a setback, that was a setup for you becoming even better.
Right.
And by not running from it, because that's the old me, probably the old you, where you're like, big feeling, shut it down, press forward.
Mm-hmm.
But you're probably a better voice actor now for pressing in.
Yes.
Learning from that. And then not only did it affect your bettering your career, but you're going to be you're a better partner, you're a better friend, you're a better mother, you're better to yourself. Like the fact that you also acknowledged yourself, like, whoa, what's going on here? And that intuitiveness that you're like caring for yourself, because that's the other thing that's really hard, I feel like, when you've been in an abusive situation. Or I honestly think women in general struggle with their self-care and taking time for themselves. But when you do, then you show up better. And so I think that's just so important when you're on this journey, because there are going to be so many hard things that come up, that you find things that bring you joy. I know I have seen you dancing, which I love dancing. Like, I was like, we need a dance party, because like that movement of your body, like there's just a release of endorphins. There's so much science actually behind dancing. There's science behind getting out in nature and having like just some time in front of water. Like listening to yourself and finding what is it that you need when you get into those moments so that you can move forward, because you can't just always be working on your self-improvement or you will burn out.
100%. I think to piggyback off of finding the things that like bring you joy, I remember sitting with the single mom that I lived with for that year. We were sitting on the back patio after we put our kids to bed, and we would wind down with a glass of wine a couple of times a week. And I remember sitting there looking at her name's Ella, and sipping my wine, and then all of a sudden just crying because I was like, I think I'm happy.
Yes.
And it's been so long since I felt that emotion. Wow. I don't know if this is right. Like what is happy? What does happy feel like? And since then I've been committed to, okay, what are the things that have brought me joy throughout my life? And 2020 was the year that I started just having solo dance parties. You know, after I put my son to bed, I put on my headphones and I just let it all out. And when you said, you know, essentially the body keeps the score, feeling like I was able to shake off all of the things that I'd been carrying for the past 6 years and even longer, right? Because I came with my own things. I ended up in that situation because of my own things.
Right.
And just to give myself permission to look like a fool sometimes, right? If somebody were to walk in, or to dance until I sweat, to dance until I cry, it has opened the doors to give me permission to just explore all the other things that could possibly bring me joy in life.
Well, that's so important. The part you talked about when you said, I think I'm feeling happy. One of the exercises that I like to do with people is helping them learn how to name their feelings. And that seems so elementary, right? Like, of course, I know, and I don't know if you've ever seen a feelings wheel. I will include it in this podcast episode for people to download because I think this is so important and it seems maybe a little bit silly. But what you do is it's like, I'm feeling happy. And then you have to go and, you know, you look on the feelings wheel and then there's like 4 more feelings below happy. And then you pick one and you dive deeper for like 3 levels, right? So then you get to this like really specific feeling, right? And I think the more that we can take time to acknowledge our feelings, we're creating a greater level of self-awareness. And we don't just go through life missing all of these opportunities, because there are so many times where we have really awesome feelings that we just kind of skip by because most of the days it's really hard. And so taking through this exercise just even expands your vocabulary. And if you are in an abusive situation, you are likely not exploring any of your feelings, because if you did, you couldn't stay. So you don't.
Right. Or even like to be able to vocalize them in that. From my, I think I have told you this before, but there was one phone call with my dad while I was in the abusive relationship where I was just sharing what was going on. And I know that it was incredibly difficult for my parents to watch me go through this. But one thing that my dad had said to me is, he said, Liz, I want you to go upstairs right now. And I want you to stand in front of the mirror and look at yourself in your eyes and tell me if you see any life in there. that was a difficult moment for me. That was the moment where I realized he killed me. There was no light. There was no life. And I'm blessed because I had somebody to be able to find a way to show me what this was doing to me, because I was lying to myself the entire time, right? He was lying to me. I was believing everything that he was saying. I was in turn lying to myself because I was an addict to the cycle of abuse. I stayed because there were glimmers of happiness and hope. And I fell in love with the possibility, that he could be a good person because we had good days. I wasn't crazy.
Right.
We had good days. He was capable of good things,
Right.
but he didn't want it as bad as I did.
Right.
Yes.
Well, and, it's hard to have, understanding for the other person, right? But they're broken too. And so it's like this fine balance, especially if you're an empath, because I would have a lot of empathy for his past, why he was where he was at. I'm a helper, fixer. As a nurse, I like to help people heal. And so I would try so hard, but it did not come with boundaries. And I think that our greatest strength, on the flip side, is our greatest weakness when we don't apply appropriate boundaries. So when you're giving more to someone than they're giving to you or to themselves, then you know that this is not a healthy place to be. And yet we stick in believing and hoping and all of those things. And it's okay. You have permission to say, this person I love and I see their potential, but I am not in a situation where I may get to experience that potential. And the best thing I can do for myself and for that person is to get out of the situation. Because if there's any hope that the abuser is going to face their own brokenness, they can't do it with you.
Right.
Because you're enabling them to stay broken. And when I was able to flip that switch in my mind, that I was actually not helping in the way that I was hoping, I was able to release that and say, you know what? Go forward. I'm going to get healthy for me, and I hope you get healthy for you. And they may not. That hasn't happened yet in my story, but I'm not going to say it's not possible, because all things are possible when we're willing to take personal responsibility for it.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
So tell us, as we're kind of coming to the end of our time together, you walked through that journey and now you are giving back. You are working as a domestic abuse advocate. Is that right? So tell me a little bit more about that and how you are supporting women, walking alongside of them like my Julia.
It's been the most beautiful, fulfilling for myself and for other women experience that I've probably ever had when it comes to what I deeply want to do is help heal others. And so I last fall was listening to a podcast by Elizabeth Gilbert called Magic Lessons. And she was talking, I believe she had Gwendolyn Doyle on her podcast. And she was talking about learning to listen to your inner whisper. You were talking about how you started to lean into your own intuition. And I was walking my dog, just listening to this podcast. And what she had said really stuck with me, because at the time I had, a year prior, met this woman who it was on the board of the YWCA here in West Michigan. And we got to talking and she was like, you would be a perfect board member for the YWCA. And, we oftentimes, will need survivors on board members too. She had sent me an application and I let it sit in my inbox for at least a year, but it took up space in my brain. Believe me, it was there. So I had this inner whisper, if you will, that the YWCA was where I needed to be. Just like that. That sentence would repeat over and over and over in my mind. And I had switched therapist at the time, and I was in a slump, like really low, really struggling. And my therapist was like, well, no wonder, like you're isolated in your house. You don't have community. What can you do? And for whatever reason, we know this is what I do. I was like, take a dance class. So I got online and literally opened up Instagram. The first thing that pops up when I opened it was a Christmas twerk class. And I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to do.
I love it.
So I was terrified, right? I went out, I bought reindeer antlers. I bought some red sparkly leggings, and I'm like ready to go to this class, but like absolutely terrified too, because I had to go by myself, right?
Wow, yeah.
But that was the first step in getting out of my comfort zone. So then I could, again, get out of my comfort zone and finally fill out that application in my inbox.
Oh, so good.
So it was the same week that I did that. I was like, I might as well ride this high and get this done, right? And I submitted that application, and no lie, the next day I had an email asking me to come in for an interview. And so I went in for the interview. I started working. This all happened in the fall. I started working in January. And I just went in there with all these ideas that's been, on the hamster wheel in my brain forever, right? All the things that helped me heal, all the ways that I want to help other women heal. So since I've been there, it's only been about 6 months, but we have completely revamped resources. One of the things that we've talked about is how important knowledge is. Once you start to educate yourself when you're in an abusive situation, I promise you the tables will turn.
Yeah.
And so I made a knowledge board that is in the house. So when I say the house, that's a 24-hour emergency shelter. And it's just there when they're ready for it, right? And then we have kicked off a trauma-informed yoga night for survivors because body keeps the score, right? So we have specifically trained yoga instructors who will be able to help you move through those feelings and will be able to sit with you if something big does arise, right? And then what has most recently been kicked off, which I think the most excited about, is when I left, I had very limited resources as far as finances go. And 98% of those who are in abusive relationships will experience financial abuse as well.
Right.
And so we kicked off a cooking class that helps our clients put food in their children's bellies and their own bellies by learning how to truly stretch a dollar. So we have got a chef who's donating his time and his resources, and he's coming in once a month. And this past cooking class, he helped them make snacks for their kids out of oatmeal, and then helped them make a whole dinner out of cornmeal. And I was there when it happened, and we had one client who came downstairs with a bowl of food for her children to try, and they absolutely loved it. And the comments that came out of that night was, I didn't know that you can make this out of this. And we opened the cupboards and we're like, okay, here's this, here's an idea for this, right? So what it essentially is doing is just giving survivors the tools to keep going, to not ever find an excuse to need your abuser again, because you are strong and you can stand on your own.
Yeah. Oh,
and as long as I'm there, I'm going to make sure that you know it.
I love it. And that is, the power that we have when we've gone through really hard things and we've learned from the school of hard knocks how to keep going. And then we can take that knowledge and share it with others. So when in the podcast notes, I am going to provide some book recommendations. I will have you send me some of your favorite books. We can include those. And you guys, if you need to talk to someone, I know I'm willing to give you my time. I don't want you to feel stuck, or you're at the point where you're ready to do something, but you don't even know where the resources are in your community. You don't have to live in Oregon with me or Michigan, right? Michigan, but we know how to help navigate to find those resources that you need. So reach out to me. I'm happy to put you in contact with Elissa and her knowledge and wisdom, but we are here to take what we have experienced and use it for good. And so if you are sitting there thinking, I know I need help, take action. Take one step and then just focus on one step and then the next step. And in a matter of time, you'll be able to look back and you'll see all that you've accomplished. But you will not get there alone because it is a very difficult road. There's so much that has been programmed in your mind that you need help from an outsider who's been there and has walked the road to help you find that truth in yourself. And we just want to offer that support to you and then help you get plugged in to your community, because I know that it's hard and it can be scary to make those phone calls and take those next steps. But we've done it and we're telling you it's possible.
And you're not alone.
Yeah.
You are not alone. There are so many women or humans out there who are experiencing the same thing that you are at this exact moment. You're not alone.
Yeah.
Find your community, ask for help, use your resources.
Yeah. It's possible. Well, thank you so much for the time that you have spent with us and sharing your story so vulnerably and how it is being now used. I'm excited to see how we're going to continue to partner. I mean, my ideas are just like exploding in my head right now of like domestic abuse support groups online and all kinds of cool things. So yeah, let's go women. We can help and support and empower each other. So thank you for your time. And you guys, I look forward to hearing if you have any comments you want to share or you need to get connected, just reach out. We're here for you.
Thank you.
New podcasts every Friday. Listen and subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you're ready to start your own transformation journey, visit www.itsyourstorytotell.com. This podcast is intended only for educational, inspirational, and entertainment purposes. The purpose of this podcast is not to replace the counsel of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org.